approve the 2019-2020 instructional calendar as option 1, a pre-Labor Day start date, or option 2, a post-Labor Day start date, and the 2020-21 instructional calendar as option 1, pre-Labor Day start date, or option 2, a post-Labor Day start date. I believe Dr. Benson is going to give us a brief presentation on this item.
And I will be brief, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, you know, this is a tough issue, and it's been a tough issue for us for years. I think part of it is that the things that folks are passionate about is the reason for why they may want a post-Labor Day or a pre-Labor Day start, is that they're really passionate about that thing. And whatever that one thing is, that's the thing that they really kind of hang on to. I think it's really hard to do a comprehensive list of pros and cons and end up trying to figure out whether I've got more pluses or minuses. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we've discussed over the years and just some considerations for the board. But I'm going to suggest that many of these things are kind of in a gray area, right? Not so cut and dry, because I guarantee you, if we were to go out and do another survey about just putting the calendars out there, do you want pre-Labor Day or post-Labor Day? I bet we would get results that are similar to what we got a year ago, because the reasons that folks are passionate about whatever calendar they prefer, they're passionate about those things, and I think that makes it really difficult to get us to move in a different direction. So what I'm challenging the board to do is just kind of try to think about this big picture moving forward. So first of all, with regard to policy and the establishment of a calendar committee, Ms. Healy, there's a may in here, right? And that is that I may use a committee, and then it says if I do use the committee, then there's a will. I guess it should be a shall, as to what that would look like, okay? I did not use a committee this year. I've got input from my teacher advisory group and my parent advisory group, but we basically put two calendars together for each of the next 2 years, not next year, not 18-19, but for 19-20 and 20-21. But this is very clear, right, and very much black and white, as that there is an option here to look at things a little bit differently. And yes, we did look to see how other school divisions go about putting together calendars, and there are a number of school divisions in our comparison group that use a different structure than what we have been using. So I informed the board that we would be going a different path this time, and we've got some calendars to share with the board as a result of that. I would note that we very much appreciate the work of the calendar committee over the years. I don't want to shortchange the efforts that were there, because there were a lot of really good discussions, and we had some really, I think, good proposals coming forward. But I think we've kind of explored all of the options over the years, and I think now it's time just to kind of sit back and look at all of those things, and then have the board determine whether or not we need to head in a different direction or not. So I do want to show the surveys from the last time we surveyed, and this survey was simply, here are two calendars, one's post-Labor Day, one's pre-Labor Day. What do you think about it as a parent? What do you think about it as a staff? And as I stated earlier, I suspect if we surveyed again, we probably would get similar results, and we're not far off of 50-50% for both of the groups. If the board has an interest in doing that with the calendars that are being proposed, we certainly could open up a poll on our website. We'd get some help from Ms. Johnson's folks, but I don't know that you would get anything different than what we've gotten previously, and I'm going to go back to that, because what people like about each one of those calendars, they're passionate about, and they're going to hang on to that thing about that particular calendar. So we heard a little bit about transportation and the buses being hot, okay? And so, yeah, that could be an issue, or it could not be an issue, depending upon what perspective the board wants to take. We only have about 4% of our buses, mainstream buses, have air conditioning on them. So if that were a goal that the board wanted to work on in terms of increasing, retrofitting our mainstream buses, that's certainly something that we could look at. Some of our comparison divisions have gone that route. Spotsylvania, as an example, has about 44% of their mainstream fleet air-conditioned buses, and they have a pre-Labor Day start scheduled for next year. Fauquier, also pre-Labor Day start, has 0% of their buses air-conditioned. So it's another one of these gray areas. It can be an issue or it cannot be an issue. And we know that we've dealt with some challenges of late with temperature fluctuations during a part of the year when you would not expect it to be close to 90 degrees and very humid. There's certainly more information that we could bring to bear here, but there's not really a showstopper that would say one way or the other, you cannot make this thing work, whether it's pre-Labor Day or post-Labor Day. So in terms of achievement, and I appreciate the information that was provided this evening. If you look at test scores from surrounding divisions that have gone to a pre-Labor Day start, I think you'll be hard-pressed to say that there's a statistically significant change in the levels of achievement. I don't think we've collected enough specific information to be able to say that we're headed there. I do appreciate what we heard this evening on a much smaller scale, but if you just go out and look at SOL scores and you know what year the school division change from a post-Labor Day to a pre-Labor Day, there doesn't seem to be a little bit of change. I don't think you can call it, and I didn't run like a p-test on it or anything, but I don't think you could call it statistically significant, okay? There is that notion of it doesn't make sense to finish your work for the semester prior to the winter break and not have that holdover when you come back. And some of that, I think, is true with positioning of spring break, which we have traditionally attached to the Easter holiday. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I'm having a hard time pointing to like a large amount of data that says, oh my gosh, right, we absolutely need to head in this direction because of this. Is there some that might suggest some improvement? Absolutely. Okay. Enough to say without question we should move? Probably not. So it's in a gray area. Testing. Okay. One of the things that we've heard is that there's a lot of assessment that goes on at the elementary level as you approach the winter break. Some of that's within our control, and we can decide what that schedule looks like. Some of it is participation in the PALS assessment, for example. But I will tell you that the PALS assessment window for assessment changes based upon when you start school. So the earlier you start, that window moves back from the winter break, right? So is this an absolutely you should go, absolutely not go? Probably not. Is there a reason to stop you? Probably not. Payroll, okay? So we had in the transition year, this is really interesting, right? So in the transition year, you're going to have folks that on one cycle had their first paycheck in October, and in the next cycle they're going to get their first paycheck in September, which on one level would be great for new teachers that would be coming a little bit earlier in August. They would still get that stipend that we're giving them for participating in the New Teacher Institute, but then they would get their first check at the beginning of September. So the bonus for teachers in the year that we transition is you get 2 paychecks in a given month. So you get one from the last year and one from the new year for one time. And so we've heard some teachers talk about the need to be working a second job during the summer, and that might limit the amount of time that they can do that in a transition year. There would be 2 paychecks in September. And then the next year, you would still have a significant summer. It's just it would start shortly after Memorial Day, and we would be looking at a start potentially in the second week in August. But we are poised, if the board should decide to entertain, maybe exploring going in this direction, that we could certainly execute that. So cost, okay? So obviously, if we were to throw into the mix the need potentially to look at retrofitting buses with air conditioning, we would have to work that into the cost. But there's also been some conversation about the cost related to the differential in heating and cooling costs. And I think we had a video that was played last year from a previous board meeting that suggested it might be in the neighborhood of $500,000 or so. So I asked our energy manager to do an analysis based upon historical data for us. And so 15 occupied days in August would have an increased cost of about $303,000. 10 unoccupied days in June would be a savings of about $187,000. 10 unoccupied days in winter, because we would shut down for basically 2 weeks during the winter break, we would save approximately $158,000, which means there would be a net savings if the board, based upon historical data, of about $42,500 if the board should choose to go in this direction. Is that significant enough savings to say, oh my gosh, we should start early? Well, probably not. Is it enough to say, you should stick with a traditional calendar? Well, probably not. So it's just there are a lot of gray areas in every one of these considerations that we have talked about over the years. CGS, okay, which came up again this evening, and having our schools not all start at the same time. So at the most recent CGS board meeting, we were provided with a report that had some recommendations from the Department of Education that were really geared at trying to get students across sites to work more collaboratively. Okay, and one of the things that was noted in 2 places in the report was that 3 of the school systems that participate in the governor schools were going to be able to work more closely in the coming year, because they are on the same calendar. Mm-hmm. Now, we've also heard previously that that we can make that work. At the same time, there might be some challenges associated with that. It's not just the divisions, though, that are in the Commonwealth Governor School. These are the start dates for the first day of school for this coming school year for our contiguous school systems. And I picked the contiguous ones because one of the ways that you can get a waiver is that if you're surrounded by school systems that are starting prior to the winter break. Or prior, sorry, I got that winter break on my mind. prior to Labor Day. So next year, Stafford and the city of Fredericksburg are the only 2 that will be starting post Labor Day. And the other thing that's interesting is the majority of the surrounding divisions, and Prince William is certainly an exception, the majority of them are starting early enough to finish the first semester prior to the winter break. Okay, and quite frankly, if you're not going to start early enough to finish before the winter break, it makes no sense at all to even consider this. So I want to make the board aware of what is happening around us, and I think we heard a statistic about the percentage of divisions in the Commonwealth that remain on a post-Labor Day start. So there's a clear copy of this in your agenda item. This is a traditional calendar for the 2019-20 school year, and it has pretty much what you would expect to see in a traditional calendar. We have a post-Labor Day start. We have basically what you have seen in previous years with minor tweaks based upon where the end of the marking periods fall, but looks pretty much like we've seen before, okay? We also have a calendar for that same school year that is a pre-Labor Day start. We would welcome our new teachers the second week in August, and we would start on the 12th if this were of interest to the board, finishing the first semester prior to the winter break. Now, I agree that there are tweaks that could be applied to this. And one of the challenges in terms of getting the work days in there is getting the number of instructional days in so we can say that the semester is done. But that we certainly could go back if the board is interested in moving in this direction. We certainly could go back and look what changes we would make. And then there's full 2 weeks off at the winter break, and again, we pretty much shut down as a school system, and we recoup some savings based upon historical data and with related to heating of our facilities. The other thing that's different about this one is that spring break is moved up into March. So there's a work day at the end of the 3rd marking period for teachers to finish their grading, and then the following week is identified as spring break so that you have a week off between the 3rd and 4th semester, okay? And we wrap up right near the end of right near at the end of May around Labor Day. And yeah, there are some things here that are not perfect. And part of the challenge again is making sure we get those instructional days in there, the 180 days of instruction, 90 days per semester, and so that creates some anomalies with where holidays fall. We did incorporate a 3-day weekend for the Easter holiday. It's not what we are used to, but there seems to be some sense into having a spring break at the conclusion of a marking period and fixing it so that it's always at the end. So people know when we get to the end of the third marking period, there's going to be a week of spring break. So we've done the same thing for the 2021 year. So we have a traditional post-Labor Day calendar. It looks very similar to the one for 1920. And then also for 2021, we have a pre-Labor Day calendar. So that leaves us kind of at a decision point in terms of moving forward. I would encourage the board to leave this sitting out there for information more than just this meeting. And I think that's something that we have discussed, Ms. Healy. I think it would make sense to have it on the agenda for a couple of meetings, this meeting and another meeting for information, give board members an opportunity to get additional input. I mean, if there's other information that you would like us to pull together, we certainly can do that. I don't think there is that definitive one thing that's going to say, oh my gosh, we need to go. But I also don't think there's a definitive one thing that says, oh my gosh, we can't move to a pre-Labor Day opening. So, Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Benson. Does anyone have any questions? Ms. Egan, comments?
There sort of is one definitive thing for me. I mean, anybody who knows me, who's been watching my vote on this for the past 4 years, whatever it's been, I think Mrs. Hazard and I have been most vocal about it. We support the pre-Labor Day start. I like the calendar the way it is. It looks great, with one exception, and you hit it as your first critique on it, which was the lack of the teacher work day. I want to give something back to the teachers, and making them work on their break time isn't a gift; it's a punishment. So I really would like to see that a day put back in before, if we can find some way to make that happen. It's a day. So. I think that would mean a lot to them. Otherwise, I think it's great. All my parents, all of my teachers in my district have supported this. They support it this time, and I'm going to be supporting this when it comes up for a vote.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, Ms. Young?
We could go either way. Yeah.
Well, so my experience, and it's not from here, but my schooling has been 11 months in a year, so definitely more school to me is better preparation for the kids.
Thank you. Dr. Chase.
I just wanted a point of clarity on the 10 days of no heating. Reduced heating. So it's reduced heating. But don't we currently do 7 days of reduced heating? So is that just the savings for the 3, or are we counting the days that we currently? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would have to get Mr. Shrimp to provide some additional information about that. I got the summary report from him, but I'm very confident.
I don't think it would change a huge amount, but I just for clarity. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Decatur.
I guess the only thing that I would like to see sometime between now and when we, do go to vote is potential costs for retrofitting these buses if we were to go down that path, please.
Thank you, Ms. Hazard.
I think the point's been raised about the teacher workday and kind of like when grades are due. I think just sort of clarifying how that fits on top of the calendar so that, and I would invite, I know it sounds like you've talked to the teacher advisory group, but if they even have suggestions about that of, is it when grades are due, whatever, because I can at least speak to this year, and I won't, the midterms and that mess in January, but I will say, as having a senior this year, having grades due to colleges, that was a tight call this year, and I know a lot of them missed those deadlines. And granted, they go to the schools and they say that, but when you're competing sometimes, I mean, my daughter was thrilled where she was going, but for some that are really competing for spots, needing those grades early is pretty critical. So I think the grading and some of that, just discussing that to make sure we're good.
That's why I submitted to the
Okay, Mr. McOsker.
Okay. No, it's a good brief and good points by the board. There's pros and cons, and that's kind of how I look at it, and that's how I've always looked at it, and I've always voted against it, a pre-Labor Day start. And so the costs are concerning. Throwing the kids on the bus early in August are concerning. Retrofitting. In the wintertime, you just can't shut the building down, and that was a good question. You just can't shut the building down for 2 weeks and then come back to a 42-degree building, because then it'll take 2 weeks to heat back up, and the kids will be freezing. So there will have to be some ongoing costs with that. I'm not so sure the costs are going to weigh out. And then a whole point about the testing. And I'm still got to get a hold of the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland did a year-long study, and I haven't read it, but they're actually reverting back to going to a post-Labor Day start as a whole state. But some other information that I'd like is the waiver issue. The waiver issue is very tricky because the state of Virginia only allows this if every single division, from what I understand, every single division around you landlocks. Right now, we're not landlocked because Fredericksburg City is still on a post-Labor Day start, so we don't meet that waiver. Then the other waiver I understand is the amount of days missed, whether it's snow, rain, sleet, hail. So I'd like to see that waiver, because I think what we don't want is, right now, we have to have a waiver, and the waiver has to be submitted a year out. So how are we going to get around that, even if the board votes, but we don't have the waiver authority from the state? If the Fredericksburg City stays the way it is. So that's a concern, and then teacher work day is a concern for me. Getting out cleanly before the break with testing, that makes once again, it makes sense on the briefing slides. However, we can't point to any data points that show that it's actually beneficial to the kids. So anyway, yeah, show me it's better for the kids, and I think we've beat that drum that it's not. So the early Labor Day. So just to change, I'm not so sure that's such a good idea, but I'm willing to hear the data. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McOsker. I would like to follow up on Dr. Chase's question with respect to the dollars, because there are 8 days, I'm looking at pink in the calendar, 8 weekdays on the post-Labor Day and 10 on the pre-Labor Day. So it seems like the maximum savings would be potentially from 2. So and I appreciate you saying it was, and I'll just paraphrase, marginal savings, and not something that's going to make a significant difference in the final decision. But I just think that the transparency, we should have some an accurate figure there on the cost. And I'd also like to follow up on the waiver issue. I think we need to have information as a board as to how that would be addressed. We certainly don't want to approve something that's not in conformity.
I'm not suggesting that the surrounding county waiver would be the path to go. If you look at the majority of the counties that are to the west of 95, they start prior to Labor Day, and they have for a long time.
Right, and I have no idea how they got their waivers, but if Stafford County is going to be considering it, I'd like as a voting member to make sure that I have the authority to approve something, even if it's going to be contingent on the grant of a waiver. And I think those who know me know in the past I've always supported the post-Labor Day. I'm certainly open to listening, but I would appreciate the affected parties, the parents and students in the community, if they have any input to share that with us. Now, how does the board feel about putting this on for information again at the next meeting and then bringing it for a vote on the second meeting in June? Does that work for everyone? I think that will give us, and we had talked to Dr. Benson when we were putting the agenda together, that we didn't, Mr. McOsker and I thought that the board might want some more time to be able to gather input on this, because, every time we vote on this, we have some of the same people in the community, but we have new members as well. And I think we need to hear from everyone. Although those numbers were very telling. I mean, it was pretty darn close to half and half.
It was. And,
It's amazing.
I suspect that the board might be split somewhat in terms of where we may land. And I just asked the board to to look very closely at this. I think that we're going to be an outlier over time if we don't move in this direction at some point. I do think there are some general benefits that we probably cannot quantify, but we'll discuss it in the coming
Well, I'm
weeks.
not concerned about being an outlier, because I think Stafford County has always prided itself on doing what's best for our community and our schools. So, hopefully we'll come to a decision that meets the needs of the community as well as the schools. But I really appreciate your presentation.
Brief.